When silence is louder than sanctions, it means something has shifted, not just in diplomacy, but in mindset. For decades, global power was defined by volume, who could speak the loudest, impose the most restrictions, issue the harshest statements. But India, through Jaishankar's calm, collected, razor-sharp diplomacy, flipped that script. He didn't raise his voice, he raised the stakes. He didn't counter threats with threats. He countered them with facts, logic, and an unshakable commitment to national interest. That silence, measured, intentional, and disciplined, was louder than 1,000 declarations. The Western world is used to reactions. When they criticize, they expect apologies. When they press, they expect concessions. But this time they were met with silence. Not weakness, but confidence. India didn't react because it no longer needs to. It has earned the right to respond on its own terms, at its own time, in its own way. And when Jaishankar speaks, the world listens, not because he demands attention, but because he commands it. That is what true power looks like. It doesn't beg to be noticed. It doesn't shout to be understood. It simply moves forward, knowing exactly what it's doing. Sanctions, warnings, pressure. These are tools of an old world order. They used to work when countries were dependent, uncertain, and unsure. But today, India is none of those things. It's not a follower in someone else's story. It's the author of its own. And authors don't flinch at bad reviews. They keep writing. Jaishankar's silence wasn't empty. It was full of resolve, full of strategy. Full of quiet power that speaks far louder than noise ever could. This kind of silence is surgical. It cuts through chaos. It exposes insecurity in others. When a nation refuses to be provoked, it reveals how far it has come. It shows maturity, discipline, control. The West, especially the U.S., has always operated under the illusion that influence equals control. But they've now realized that influence without respect is fragile. And India is no longer willing to trade respect for comfort. That's the shift. That's the power of silence rooted in strength. Look at how Jaishankar handles interviews, press questions, global platforms. There's no shouting, no aggressive nationalism, no emotional outbursts, just calm, pointed truth. He calls out hypocrisy without ever using the word. He exposes double standards not by attacking, but by asking the right questions. When someone tries to corner India on oil purchases, human rights, or strategic alliances, he doesn't protest. He simply points to facts, and the room goes quiet. That's what happens when silence becomes your weapon, not because you lack words, but because you don't need many. This silence makes the world uncomfortable, especially those used to issuing instructions. Because a confident India does not obey, it negotiates. It doesn't seek to please, it seeks to prosper. That's a shift in balance. That's what makes Jaishankar's diplomacy different from the past. It's not about defending India, it's about defining it on the global stage without permission and without apology. So when we say silence is louder than sanctions, we mean this. India is not responding to the old rules anymore. It's writing new ones, and it doesn't need to shout to be heard. Its progress, posture, and principles speak for themselves, and that silence, poised, firm, intentional, is now the sound of rising power. India's rise isn't a surprise, it's a result. It's not something that just happened in the background or fell into place by accident. It's the product of years of relentless effort, sharp thinking, and deeply rooted cultural resilience. For too long, the world viewed India through a narrow lens, poverty, population, and potential that was never quite realized. But what they failed to see was the quiet storm building beneath the surface. This was never about hoping to rise. This was about preparing to lead, and now the results are speaking for themselves. Every great nation that has ever risen to power didn't do so by chance. It happened because of choices. Not always popular ones, not always easy, but necessary. India too has made its share of tough choices, shifting from dependence to independence, from survival to strategy, from looking outward for validation to looking inward for strength. And those choices are now paying off. The transformation wasn't overnight, but it was consistent. Whether it's IT, defense, space tech, pharmaceuticals, or global diplomacy, India has been climbing, quietly, confidently, and deliberately. What the world didn't anticipate was India's ability to do something few emerging powers ever manage: grow economically without losing its identity, modernize without westernizing, and assert itself without imitating others. India didn't copy anyone's model, it created its own, and that's what confuses old powers the most. They're used to playing by one rule book, their own, but India isn't reading that script anymore. It's writing one where it partners without submitting, competes without threatening, and defends its interests without backing down. This rise isn't reactionary, it's proactive. From building digital infrastructure that serves over 1 billion people to managing one of the world's most complex democracies, India has been solving problems the West hasn't even had to face yet. And while others debate about data, sovereignty, and digital rights, India's already implemented it. While others collapse under the pressure of multipolarity, India thrives in it, balancing ties with the US, Russia, the Middle East, and the global South without losing its footing. What makes this rise so powerful is that it's been built brick by brick, not on borrowed money, not on media hype, but on the back of people who were never given the spotlight. Farmers, engineers, coders, soldiers, entrepreneurs, teachers. This isn't the rise of a government. It's the rise of a civilization that never lost its hunger to grow, even when the world dismissed it. So no, India's rise isn't a surprise. It's a long, overdue response to centuries of being underestimated. And when someone says we didn't expect India to be here so soon, what they're really saying is we didn't expect you to do it without us. Because for years they assumed India needed hand-holding. But India just needed time and a clear direction. Now it has both, and it's moving faster than anyone predicted. That speed isn't reckless, it's earned. It's the result of decades of groundwork finally coming to life. This is what happens when a nation believes in itself, when its leaders stop asking for approval and start delivering results. When its people stop waiting for opportunity and start creating it. So no, India's rise isn't a surprise. It's a signal that the old global order no longer holds the same weight, that growth is no longer exclusive, that power today comes not just from what you own, but from what you can build, and India is building something unstoppable. Power doesn't come from pleasing, it comes from principle. For too long, global diplomacy operated on the belief that smaller or developing nations had to agree, align, or appease in order to be accepted, that to be taken seriously, you had to play by someone else's script. But India, especially through Jaishankar'S leadership, has torn that illusion apart. India isn't here to please anyone, it's here to protect its own values, chart its own path, and speak its own truth, even if it makes others uncomfortable. That is what real power looks like, not obedience but integrity. In every meeting room, every global summit, every press briefing, you can see India is no longer trying to win applause from the West. It is focused on earning respect, and respect doesn't come when you bend to every demand or echo what others want to hear. Respect comes when you know who you are, what you stand for, and where you refuse to compromise. That's what Jaishankar has brought to the table, not just sharp diplomacy, but unapologetic clarity. He doesn't decorate India's truth to make it more palatable to foreign ears. He delivers it plainly, with precision, because he knows India no longer needs to trade its dignity for acceptance. When questioned on oil deals with Russia, he didn't blink, he didn't stumble, he answered with facts, economics, and India's national interest front and center. That moment told the world India will not be dictated to. It will engage, it will negotiate, but it will not surrender its priorities to fit someone else's politics. That shift, from pleasing to principled, is what marks the beginning of true global power, because when a nation is no longer afraid to say no, it is ready to shape the future, not just follow it. And let's be clear, principles are not stubbornness, they are structure. They are the lines you refuse to cross so you can stand with confidence when the pressure mounts. India's foreign policy today is built on principles of multipolarity, mutual respect, non-interference, and strategic autonomy. These aren't just talking points, they're the pillars of a new kind of leadership. One that doesn't rely on flattery or fear, but on balance, consistency, and fairness. That's why India can talk to the U.S., Russia, Iran, the UE, Europe, and Africa without having to choose sides, because India isn't begging for alliances. It's building relationships based on values, not vanity. The West, especially the U.S., has been used to loyalty in exchange for access, compliance in exchange for trade, but India isn't buying into that game. It's offering partnership, not submission. That's what throws the old powers off. They expect diplomacy to come with deference, but India is showing that you can be polite and still be powerful. You can be respectful and still be resolute. This is the quiet confidence of a country that no longer sees itself as emerging, but as arrived. And this shift has massive implications. It shows other nations, especially in the global south, that you don't have to trade your values for influence, that you can rise without losing yourself, that you can be powerful without being a puppet. That lesson, more than anything else, is what the world is now watching. India didn't take shortcuts, it didn't sell out, it stayed grounded, and in doing so, it earned something more valuable than temporary approval. It earned long-term authority. So no, power doesn't come from pleasing. Pleasing is temporary. Principles are permanent, and India is proving every single day that when your foundation is strong, you don't need to bow. You rise. Global power isn't claimed, it's proven. It's not something you declare with speeches, it's something you build with action. India isn't just asking for recognition anymore, it's earning it, piece by piece, move by move, in every sector that matters. And what makes this rise different is that India hasn't tried to dominate. It has tried to deliver. Real power doesn't come from announcing yourself as a global leader. It comes from behaving like one even when the world isn't watching. India didn't go to the world saying, "Respect us." It built satellites that reached Mars on a fraction of the cost others spent. It built digital infrastructure that connected over 1 billion people without waiting for Western aid or approval. It became the pharmacy of the world during the pandemic, sending vaccines across continents, not because it wanted headlines, but because it understood responsibility. That's what separates noise from power, intention backed by consistent delivery. This is why the global narrative is changing. The old powers are beginning to realize that influence isn't about how long you've had the mic, it's about who has something meaningful to say. And when India speaks today, the world listens. Not because of military might or media spin, but because it brings solutions to the table. Whether it's climate change, digital governance, food security, or economic stability, India is no longer part of the problem. It's becoming part of the answer. Look at the global south. For decades, many countries have felt like spectators in a game played by richer nations. India is changing that. It's not just leading for itself. it's opening doors for others. Through trade corridors, technology partnerships, and diplomatic outreach, India is proving that leadership isn't about who you control, it's about who you uplift. That's how power becomes sustainable, when it creates value beyond borders. And India is doing that without the burden of colonial guilt or ideological manipulation. It's doing it from a place of shared struggle and mutual respect. India isn't following the Western blueprint. It's drawing its own map, and that's exactly why the world is taking notice. The West used to decide who got a seat at the table. Now India is building its own table and inviting others to sit. That kind of leadership isn't symbolic. It's structural. It means India isn't content with being part of someone else's system. It's shaping the next one. And when you can influence the architecture of global decision-making, you don't need to shout to prove your power. The results speak louder. What's even more significant is that India's power is not built on dominance. It's built on balance. It maintains strong relations with the U.S., while continuing defense and energy ties with Russia. It strengthens bonds with Europe while standing firm with its neighbors in Asia and the Middle East. That kind of diplomatic versatility doesn't happen by chance. It happens when a nation knows exactly who it is and what it brings to the table. So, when Jaishankar speaks with quiet confidence, it's not performance, it's proof. Proof that India isn't chasing validation anymore. It's setting its own terms. It's not looking for handshakes. It's building handholds for other nations who have been overlooked. And in doing so, it's earning something no amount of money or media coverage can buy: trust. In today's fractured world, that's the rarest and most powerful currency. Global power, in the truest sense, is shown, not told. It's not about being feared, it's about being relied upon. And today, more and more nations are turning toward India, not because they're told to, but because they choose to. That's how you know India hasn't just risen. It's proving every single day that it belongs at the center of the global future. This is not about headlines, it's about headlines becoming history. In a world driven by constant noise, viral moments, and attention-grabbing statements, what truly lasts is not what's said, but what's done. Anyone can trend for a day, anyone can grab the spotlight for a moment, but not everyone can shift the course of global perception and hold that position with consistency and substance. That's exactly what India is doing right now. It's not chasing relevance, it's building legacy. It's not waiting to be talked about, it's moving in ways that make the world stop and take note. India is no longer content with being the story for a day. It's writing chapters that will define the century. This shift didn't happen because of a single speech or a viral quote. It happened because of results stacked on top of results. From becoming the fifth largest economy to launching a moon mission on a budget smaller than a Hollywood movie, India is showing that headlines can be powerful, but only if they're backed by history in the making. The old powers were used to leading by dominance, by dictating terms and managing perceptions. But India is changing that model. It doesn't need a PR campaign to justify its rise. Its progress is visible. It's measurable, it's credible. From trade deals that reshape regional influence to defense production that reduces dependency, from building a national digital identity system to exporting top-tier talent and innovation, India's rise is not an idea, it's a reality. And that reality is becoming embedded in the global structure of power, economy, and thought leadership. That's why this is more than a geopolitical moment. It's a generational shift. Jaishankar's sharp, unflinching approach on the global stage is just the articulation of something much deeper, a nation that no longer flinches when challenged, When India talks today, it's not trying to impress, it's setting terms. It's making space for itself not by asking, but by acting. When he says India will do what is in India's interest, it's not provocation, it's permission, a declaration that India doesn't need to be told what it's allowed to pursue anymore. It already knows. This is where the transformation becomes undeniable. India is not just being included in the conversation, it's beginning to direct the conversation. On issues like climate equity, tech regulation, global South representation, and supply chain reform, India's voice is not only heard, it's shaping outcomes. And the more it delivers, the more the world understands that this isn't a passing phase. This is structural, this is generational, this is historic. The West often thought power was about visibility, how often your flag appears, how loud your voice is in meetings, how many cameras are pointed your way. But India is showing that true power is about durability, quiet, steady, grounded strength that keeps showing up, keeps performing, and keeps building, regardless of applause. That's what makes headlines turn into history. They stop being announcements and start becoming benchmarks. India's rise isn't loud because it doesn't need to be. The proof is in the performance, the respect is in the results, and when the next generation looks back, they won't just remember a headline. They'll remember a shift, a period when one nation stepped into its own power, not by asking for attention, but by taking responsibility. That's when the world knew India didn't just make the news. India became part of the new global narrative. India is not asking for a seat at the table. It's building the next table. That one line says everything about how drastically the global balance of power is changing. For decades, international institutions, trade agreements, and geopolitical alliances were created and controlled by a handful of nations who decided who got a voice, who got to lead, and who had to follow. India was invited, sometimes reluctantly, often as a symbolic gesture. But today, India is no longer waiting for invitations. It's designing a new kind of global framework, one where respect is mutual, voices are equal, and decisions aren't made in backrooms behind closed doors, but out in the open with shared responsibility. This change didn't come overnight. It's the result of decades of being sidelined, spoken down to, and underestimated. But instead of staying bitter, India got better. It studied the system, understood its gaps, and then began building something smarter, something more inclusive, something future-ready. Whether it's the creation of regional alliances like the International Solar Alliance, championing platforms for the Global South, or restructuring supply chains through digital corridors, India is playing the long game. It's not just reacting to the system, it's redefining it. The real power doesn't come from sitting at someone else's table hoping for a fair deal. It comes when you can say, let's build our own table, and we'll make sure it's better. That's exactly what India is doing. When countries across Asia, Africa, and Latin America look at India, they don't just see a rising power. They see a partner that understands their struggle. A country that wasn't handed power, but earned it. A country that doesn't speak in the language of dominance, but in the tone of dignity. That's why nations are drawn to India's leadership. It's not arrogant, it's authentic. This is also why traditional power centers feel uneasy. They're used to controlling the narrative, setting the agenda, and making the rules. But now there's a new player at the table who didn't ask for permission to lead. India is not hostile. It's not disruptive for the sake of disruption. It's deliberate, it's organized, and most importantly, it's focused. It knows what it wants to build, not just for itself, but for a more balanced global future. When India speaks about development, it doesn't lecture, it shares solutions. When it engages in diplomacy, it doesn't demand loyalty. It offers mutual gain. When it enters negotiations, it brings history, scale, and substance, not entitlement. This kind of leadership is rare. It doesn't scream for attention, yet it draws respect. That's the essence of building your own table. You define the rules, you create the atmosphere, and you decide who gets heard, not based on hierarchy, but on merit and contribution. In tech, India is building its own digital stack. In defense, it's producing its own systems. In space, it's reaching farther with less. And in diplomacy, it's becoming the bridge between the polarized West and the restless global South. Each of these moves isn't just about national pride, they're about global responsibility. India is not only rising for itself, it's inviting others to rise with it. That's what the new table looks like. India is no longer seeking a voice. It is becoming the microphone. It's not waiting for recognition. It's making itself impossible to ignore. And in doing so, it's sending a message to the entire world. True power doesn't come from being included in someone else's plan. It comes from having the courage to make your own and lifting others while you do it. That's the future India is building, and that's why the world is finally paying attention.